grittiness, the realism. This is Battlefield.
Alright everybody, welcome back to another video. Yeah. So I've seen a lot of discussion about why people are leaving Battlefield 6, and ultimately what's happening is bigger channels are basically recycling my talking points. The lack of open space, dynamic systems, etc., providing a really astroturfed critique of the declining state of the game. Without naming names, these are the people who've been fake hyping this game for the past 3 months, and all of a sudden they're critical about the game, and I'm not even sure their views are organic. So I'm going to provide a fairly controversial take here, one that isn't so easy to just copy, and we're going to get into the real reasons why people are leaving this game. So listen, this game has massive potential. I've tried to be positive about the game. Season 1 was a decent start, some good ideas, but the more time went on, the problems started to become increasingly obvious. And there's a growing sense that Battlefield is starting to lose aspects of itself. That DNA core to the experience is starting to regress into non-existence. The most important problem, I've said this before, is the lack of open space. There's no scale in this game. And when there's no scale, vehicles have less presence on the battlefield. Base maps are way too constricted. They've had a few good maps in Fort Linden. Those are practically the only good large-scale maps, except they're not in the game's core playlists. People don't know they exist, and the game desperately needs these right now. That's just poor handling by the devs, prioritizing the wrong content like the winter-themed reskin of Empire State. Unfortunately, games had a massive decline in player count for a multitude of reasons, with Steam showing a player drop of about 80+%, reflective of the game's problems. So I'm going to go into every single problem I think is pissing people off with this game and outline all the reasons players are leaving. Because there's just way too much wrong with the game itself, beyond the lack of open space and infantry focus. There's consistent technical problems. There's game design problems, map layout, site plan, gameplay, weird art and design choices, user interface, a free-to-play system offering less content than that well-structured premium model, weak quality of content, sandbox is smaller, weapon and vehicle variety are smaller, game modes aren't properly balanced for maps are terrible, and the game doesn't seem to understand how to prioritize performance over visuals. In virtually every area, there's some issue, and the game's dropping in player count for said reasons. Like I said, game has massive potential. Physics are great, it's visually impressive at times, your mechanics are there, content was punctual, gameplay could be better. I really like the overall theme. I want this game to succeed in the long run. Ultimately, in order for that to happen, we need to hammer in its weak points. The easiest one is the fact that people have gotten bored of the content in Season 1. Not only that, but its delivery seems fragmented, split into pieces and throughout at random dates during the season. So the experience seems all disconnected. You're also giving out less content, less maps compared to what we were getting over a decade ago with the map pack premium model. A more cohesive strategy would be, here's map pack 1, California Resistance, with everything condensed into one complete high quality package. You get Red Sect, Eastwood, Downtown, Marina, Defense Nexus, etc., all designed for rush, breakthrough and conquest in mind, all within that nice late summer's LA Art Pass theme. The winter reskin would have been a separate DLC for December 9th, and even that ideally should have had several more snow themed large maps as its own map pack, and that would justify all the skins you've made for this one map. Except your seasons are all over the place, and some of the content isn't even prepared by the developers, like the maps you pulled from Fort Linden. There's also nothing really interesting about the content on offer, aside from Red Sect. Season 1 California Resistance would have been a great time to introduce attack boats and naval combat. Downtown really needed that big Carg Island, Gulf of Oman type boat invasion, but you failed to deliver on that, so the next season really needs to add something unique to the sandbox. And because of this, there's a growing perception that there isn't enough effort going into the game. I was the first one who said we need to get back to map packs and that premium model. Quality and content were way better there, reminiscent of Battlefield 3 and 4. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be happening. Problem number 2 is that there's a growing perception that the studio's culture is starting to interfere with the nature of Battlefield. This is really starting to piss people off. To understand where shit is going wrong with Battlefield 6, it's important to examine the teams behind its development. The studio culture has a significant impact on how the final product shapes up and has drastically changed in the last decade. For Battlefield 6, EA shifted away from a singular DICE-only dev model and organized 5 studios into a collective group called Battlefield Studios, embracing a progressive worldview, focusing on diversity and boasting a 52% representation of women in the company, put there by consultancies like Employee Community Groups, ECGs. And the result isn't better games. With 5 studios working on this game, you're somehow getting less productive output, less in terms of scale, quality, and content. A free-to-play model no one asked for, the game wasn't marketed as, and the game is literally a confused mess. It's important to mention this because that studio culture, their output, their attitude, that all permeates into the game. It's hard not to connect the game's strange artistic design choices to the development team. The inclusion of female soldiers, classes are strangely split 50-50 between male and female, removing the option to choose gender entirely, forcing you to play as a female for critical roles like the engineer and support class, an emerging focus on character identity represented through its DLC and flashy specialist skins. This surface level bullshit isn't reflective of Battlefield. What was promised as a gritty, realistic experience is quickly starting to look like a game holding itself back from gaying itself out. This is at a point in time after DEI was cancelled by Larry Fink at BlackRock. So I'm not sure what the hell is going on here. To expand on that, BlackRock, the world's largest asset management firm, who installed mandatory DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs across every sector, essentially a cheat code for the weak and underqualified to get into these positions, saw mass failure across the board, so shifted their focus to pure financial returns amid anti-woke capitalism backlash. So they cancelled DEI, yet for some reason, companies are still following this format. In regards to Battlefield, DEI is evident, and it's had a massive impact on scale, performance, maintenance, quality, and content, etc. Everything is reduced. The sheer lack of scale within their maps is the most glaring issue. Narrow, quarantined arenas, overly decorated to the point of suffocation, with each interior space designed by what looks like Karen trying to make a house a home. This is important because it has a negative impact on performance, and your frame rate gets fucked. And listen, I'm all for the inclusion of female soldiers. It's weird, and I'm completely repulsed by it, but this is a video game, so I can accept it here. It's great that we can appeal to female gamers. The problem is that you've stripped players of the right to choose gender. This concept is reinforced by the attitude of the developers, ignoring player feedback about this gender issue if they haven't already blocked you for posting about it. I know I've already spoken about this, but it's important to make my case. These are traits in line with female behavior. If you say something wrong, they block your ass. Alexia Christofi, a developer, thinks you should pick the gender of the class you want to play as, giving gender and surface level customizations precedence over the importance of the class role itself. Visuals now have priority over class type. This problem started back in Battlefield 5. We've all seen their pathetic take on World War II. Disabled female soldiers on the front line fighting Germans is a historically inaccurate mockery of World War II. Patrick Sunderland responded to this backlash by saying, "We stand up for the cause, either accept it or don't buy the game." Game released, reduced player interest, diversity focus, severe lack of content, pushing players further away. This all got subsequently worse by 2042. Again, female-centric marketing, personality focus, specialist skins, wacky colorful customization, player identity. Game literally turned into a fashion show. We're seeing elements of feminine intervention permeate through the whole damn experience. This is where this shit is coming from. Suddenly, you're also losing aspects of what made Battlefield unique, iconic, and appealing to that mostly male demographic. I'm not just talking about realistic, grounded military skins. I'm also talking about the large open environments, varied sandbox, the emphasis on tactical, strategic design, gameplay, scale in arsenal, vehicles, and the overall sense of a bigger sandbox. Again, I know I've spoken about this stuff before. It's not the time, but it's definitely a crucial baseline of my whole argument here, because this baseline issue, this team structure, is the catalyst for all the problems this game has. Many of these problems were addressed over a decade ago, which is what makes this so frustrating. Problem number 3 is this game's severe performance issues. Game becomes borderline unplayable at times, and people are sick to death of this shit. This clip right here perfectly illustrates the problem. Frame rate drops to the point of slow motion, rubber banding, input lag, delayed hit registration, desync, etc. If we look at the top left, you'll typically see a few symbols which indicate the problem. This is a problem with frame rate and tick rate.
No shit.
Frame rate dips, tick rate takes a hit, and data fails to transfer between client and server, so we get this slow motion stuttering frame rate drop first and packet loss second, which means shots or certain actions fail to register whilst you're fighting the game's slow motion stuttering FPS drops and input lag. On top of that, there are also random lag spikes that develop out of nowhere. Your ping will be low 1 minute and skyrocket to highs of between 100 and 200 and back to baseline, and that cycle repeats indefinitely. I'm not sure what the problem is, where it comes from. You can see my network performance graph here on the left. It's definitely not client side because I have really good internet. My ping is always low, and I've seen other players' pings fluctuate in game, so it's not an isolated issue. I even went to test this problem on other games and found no problems. Games work fine. So this is exclusive to Battlefield 6. The reason I think frame rate is dropping in Battlefield 6 is because the game is heavy with shit tons of highly detailed assets. Battlefield has always built on scale, destruction, massive player counts, so it's a really heavy game. That being said, Battlefield 6 tries to condense this into a smaller, high-profile package, trading scale for detail and visuals. We're playing on smaller, denser maps with shit tons of high-poly assets, photoscanned geometry, procedural textures, effects, overlays, etc., whilst at the same time trying to run these large multiplayer battles. Without getting into all the technical details, that's already a ton of stress on your GPU, CPU, and frame rate suffers as a result depending on your system. It literally doesn't matter what you do to combat the problem. You could move the game from an SSD to your PC, clear up system storage, empty caches, change all your graphics settings to low. I typically play on low, making sure lighting quality is low, screen space reflections are turned off, and high fidelity objects are set to low. Nothing matters, you get the same experience. Matches rarely feel smooth from start to finish, unless of course you're a Battlefield YouTuber with a decked out PC dunking on everyone and wondering why people are leaving the game. Instead, players are dealing with stutters, frame rate drops to the point of slow motion, and hitching that break immersion and disrupt gunfights, the worst possible moments. For a fast-paced multiplayer, high-octane bullshit shooter, this kind of inconsistency is unforgivable. What makes the problem worse is how unpredictable these performance issues are. High-end systems experiencing sudden FPS drops for no reason, with lower-end systems struggling to maintain stability even on reduced settings. Network-related lag compounds the issue, frequent enough that deaths often feel disconnected from what's happening on screen. When players can't trust what they're seeing, skill stops mattering. Again, heavy destruction, dense player clusters, tons of complex geometry all overload the CPU and asset streaming pipeline. At best, producing sudden frame rate drops, stuttering and stalling. At worst, shader compilation problems, things aren't rendering in, players aren't loading in, textures look like shit, and live data streaming compete for system resources, causing visible stalls. These issues are structural, and that revealed an engine that prioritizes the visuals over stability while failing to manage its own simulation demands. If you're playing on PC, make sure you haven't installed this game on an external hard drive. This is fairly common knowledge, but games on SSDs tend to perform worse. This game is not designed for that. You will bomb your shit so fast with all these simultaneously, leaving you looking like this.
Hi, sir. My name's Lawrence. So sometimes people call me Chunk.
The experience is a straight nightmare, unplayable. Everything from the UI to the game itself takes significantly longer to load in. You load a multiplayer game, that takes about 5 minutes to load, so you've entered the game late, tickets have been reduced, and you're stuck in a choke point. Navigating the UI, you have to wait for every weapon, every attachment to render in. You're in the game, and everything is molding itself in real time, on the lowest LOD possible. Textures haven't loaded in yet, player models aren't ready, so everyone's invisible. You can't see your hands or your weapon. Shaders and textures in the environment keep breaking. And for some reason, network-related lag is compounded even further, so lag spikes, rubber banding, desync, etc. Server to host problems. You might as well jump out the fucking window at this point. The fix to this ultimately is to make sure you're not playing on an SSD. Install to your computer, play on reduced low settings, and make sure you're playing on a stable 60 FPS. For some reason, DICE has rolled out 60 Hz tick rate servers. Your FPS always needs to be higher than the tick rate. If FPS drops, now you've got packet loss. This is why people want 30 Hz servers. I think typically people believe higher tick rate servers means cleaner gameplay, but considering there's so much shit on the map, it's literally dropping your FPS performance. Rubber banding, kills behind cover, delayed hit markers, inconsistent TTK, stuttering, slow motion, desync, etc. are all amplified by the heavy nature of this game's visual clutter. Heavy post-processing, destruction, each brick, each piece of rubble, particle effects, high poly objects, procedural textures and so on all need to be rendered in real time, and that's basically stressing both CPU and GPU. That being said, when you're free from all those issues, the game is genuine fun. However, all of this is screaming they didn't stress test the game enough, and it's currently annoying to play. This is a major reason why people are leaving this game. Problem number 4, I've listed as a general nitpick of the UI. You start the game, wait for the shaders to install because they can't be bothered to preload those. You're then blasted with adverts for the Battle Pass. Past that, there's an overly cluttered UI with a list of game modes you're simply not interested in. Compared to previous Battlefield games, this seems like a massive regression in terms of visual clarity and ease of use. There's just way too much noise. You scroll through the menu and you're looking for the server browser, which is a lot harder to find compared to everything else. Its presence in the UI makes it actively difficult to find, let alone use intuitively. For a series built on player choice and community-run servers, hiding this feature behind layers of menus and unnecessary game modes feels like a fundamental misunderstanding of that Battlefield DNA. When players do find the server browser, they're often met with bugs and friction. Filters fail to save, refreshes break matchmaking results, servers appear and disappear inconsistently, and joining a match can dump players back into the main menu without explanation. Sometimes pings are incorrect, player counts are inaccurate, or queues silently fail. These issues are common enough that many players simply stop trying to use the server browser altogether, so the result is a system that technically exists, but functionally discourages engagement. At the same time, this game places an increasing emphasis on portal mode and community-driven experiences, offering them as a substitute for traditional developer-made content, which on paper sounds great. In practice, it introduces a serious problem. Player-based fragmentation is one of those problems. Instead of guiding players into a shared core experience, portal mode is dividing the player base across countless custom modes and servers. Matchmaking suffers, population density drops, and that sense of a unified ecosystem is gone, especially considering the wide variety of modes the game already offers, many of which are mandatory if you want to progress certain unlocks, splintering the player base that much further. The other problem with Portal is the nature of the content filling that void. Much of that Portal and community created material relies on visually basic or recycled assets. For example, you search for a custom map and it's all shit made with blocks and it looks like shit. Naturally, people would imply that the community could now build maps that the devs couldn't. And that's fine if you want to see a Minecraft version of Battlefield. Frostbite is hailed for its visual fidelity. I don't play Battlefield to look at blocky shit. I want to see sandbars, coastlines, palm trees, a range of different biomes and environments, along with that military theme. Bunkers, structures, airstrips, carriers, etc. The game should provide all of that in the amazing Frostbite engine. On top of that, you're almost always seeing remakes of older maps like Metro or traced over COD maps stripped down to their basic shape. While creativity exists, it often lacks the scale, polish, and systemic depth of developer-crafted Battlefield maps. This also creates the impression that Portal mode is being used to pad content volume rather than complement a strong foundational offering. So instead of the devs expanding Battlefield with high-quality dev-made content, Portal mode, Portal community-driven experiences risk replacing that with smaller, flatter, and uglier maps not reflective of next-gen material. You do not want this game becoming a Forge mode for Battlefield. It's functional, but visually empty, and you miss out on all that fidelity Frostbite brings to the table. No Levolution, no dynamic weather systems, etc. People also risk losing their Portal experiences every time DICE update the game, so that's a massive problem. On top of the fact that the tools already look fairly complicated to use, so that would really piss people off. Problem number 5 is there is a growing perception that Battlefield 6 has underdelivered and players feel conned. so to speak. So I've spoken about this before. Battlefield was marketed as a gritty, authentic military experience. Except now, it seems like the game is holding itself back from woke themes like weirdo, colorful player skins, which seem to get worse every time I come back to this game. None of these cosmetics make any real sense. This is not something a real military unit would be wearing out on the field. Weird yellow accents in certain edges of tactical gear, or feeding into the idea that Battlefield 6 values decoration over utility again. The focus appears to be on surface level customization rather than the deep tactical systems that once defined each class, to even map design and gameplay flow. Again, we do not want to see characters or personality. Keep it basic, stick to that faceless squad warfare aesthetic. You've taken away the ability to choose gender like you had in BF5, and there's still time to course correct here. You could release more operator types for each class in Season 2, specifically for the engineer and support class in NATO, instead of keeping the roles assigned to specific genders. Provide more male and female options for each class. Maps are another major problem, because clearly what you've done is made 9 maps. 1 is a remake for some reason. So you've really just made 8 maps. But these aren't real large-scale Battlefield maps. They're tiny, restricted COD maps, which can be split into 2 locations each. For example, Empire State and Manhattan Bridge both take place in the same location, New York. Ideally, should both be merged together to make one large Battlefield map, with tanks, jets, boats, LAVs, etc. complementing the map, except they've been split into 2 very small maps, and this was done for every fucking map. This is completely lazy. I'm sorry. Did you honestly think you were going to get away with that shit?
Teams have been working so hard on this for so long. I just...
It's all bullshit!
Problem number 6, besides all of those technical problems, when this game runs, it's a very enjoyable experience. They definitely nailed that fast-paced, high-octane version of Battlefield. It's addictive, it's fun, but that fast-paced style is reflective of that COD formula Vince Zampella brought into the franchise. Remembering he was a COD developer, this of course all informs a smaller, narrow, condensed version of Battlefield, with choke point heavy layouts, which you're gated into with 4-second kill timers. That can all lead to burnout very quickly. Again, maps are overly decorated to its own detriment. Streets look like a junkyard. Props on top of props. But this isn't cover, this is decoration. Abandoned police cars have sandbags and street cones neatly organized all around them. And this is an OCD the designers have, because this is every corner of the fucking map. Every room also seems to be made by an interior designer. Previous games kept their interiors almost vacant, and that would favor the game's performance. When you're constantly engaged in fast-paced combat in these really dense areas, it puts a ton of stress on your performance. And as you know, frame rate takes a massive hit. Maps like Empire State, Manhattan Bridge, or Siege of Cairo are all really dense. It doesn't help that the devs also went for this post-apocalyptic style. In most of their maps, you're almost always seeing bombed out buildings and streets, vehicles and debris, barriers scattered everywhere. Huge craters in the middle of nowhere where providing hiding spots for infantry and a problem for vehicles. Collapsed structural elements, offering ramps to climb on, which all this ultimately gets in the way and further complicates the map with multiple paths so you can get jumped from every corner. This bombed out look is also reflective of Battlefield 3's Aftermath DLC. You see that same post-apocalyptic style here. BF6 jumps straight into this with every map, and it creates this visually noisy, hard-on-the-eyes environment with jagged edges. Again, it's constipated with shit tons of high-poly assets, making it difficult to see targets. An enemy could be hiding in a bunch of trash and you literally wouldn't see them. This is where you start to realize these maps also have no strategy, no utility, no tactical thinking behind these maps. They're just real-world sites made to look pretty. Infantry flow is terrible. There's no room to spread out or flank, especially on rush because of the close proximity, again, of these kill boundaries. Players are deliberately funneled into messy, narrow corridors and hallways, which turn into massive choke points. Objective points might typically be surrounded with multiple entrances and sightlines, multiple levels and windows to peek out from, and this is a consistent thing I have seen in many recent shooters, and it's impossible to gauge targets in this environment because you could literally get shot from any direction simultaneously. but they keep using this philosophy like they found some secret formula. This is fucking terrible for gameplay because it now makes the whole map complicated and harder to read. There's also no sense of balance. Manhattan Bridge is absolutely pathetic on breakthrough. You spawn at Pebble Beach and you're immediately thrown into this lopsided infantry chaos. Defense have all the high ground and 2 structures for cover, whilst the offense are burying their faces in these awkward giant rocks you've placed everywhere, which they're constantly vaulting over. And these don't even exist on the real site. There's no vehicles to help push through the first layer of defense, and this is virtually every map. There was no planning, no strategic thought, no balance. It's like they didn't test the game, and it's absolutely pathetic game design. Vehicle gameplay also suffers because the maps follow this 2 to 3 lane structure for vehicles, so when one vehicle gets destroyed, it clogs the entire lane, quickly turning into a junkyard. This means that the vehicle behind then has to push the destroyed vehicle forward just to get through the map. This is more obvious on Siege of Cairo and Manhattan Bridge, and practically every other map follows the same format. Mirak Valley and Eastwood might be the only open maps, but even then, paths are subtly curated to take you in one way, with vegetation, rocks, or buildings guiding you in the same direction. Same concept for infantry, creating choke points and predictable lanes. If you compare this to Caspian Border, you'll see there are set paths which guide you through the map. However, you also have all this open space to go any which direction you want. There's wide open sightlines. None of this exists in Battlefield 6. There's also a noticeable pattern where updates intended to optimize the game instead introduce new performance problems. A patch will fix one thing while quietly adding another problem somewhere else. Stuttering, menu lag, or mid-match freezes. This creates a sense that the game is never truly stable, just temporarily less broken. Instead of building confidence, each update becomes something players brace for. Ultimately, this is all on the back end of the 5 development studios building this game. We used to have one studio making this franchise. All of this feeds into the larger perception of reduced output. This structure simply does not have the endurance, the stamina, the testosterone to deliver a cohesive, high-quality product without an obscene amount of support, financial backing, and simps ultimately, because that's the only males I can see in this environment. Battlefield has always sold itself on large-scale chaos and cinematic moments, but those moments collapse when the game can't maintain performance under pressure, and the game is clearly prioritizing visuals over substance. Explosions, vehicles, and large player counts, which are supposed to define the experience, all end up exposing its weakest technical foundations, turning what should feel epic into something exhausting to sit through because of said performance reasons. So that's going to do it for this one, guys. Of course, it helps if you like, share, and subscribe, all of that good stuff. I will be continuing all of this in the next video, so stay tuned for that, going even deeper into the state of this game. Like I said, game has massive potential, but its development teams are holding the game back. The results of this development team are making people conscious about the negative impacts this system has on the final product. Anyway, that's going to do it for this one, guys. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
I need a fucking medic!